But what if the punchline lands like a punch to the gut? In this special series, we're diving deep into the stories that blur the line between just a prank and something far more personal. 5 real people, 5 unforgettable moments. And one question we all need to ask: when does a joke stop being funny? In episode 1, you'll meet Lena, who thought she just got the biggest surprise of her life: the keys to a new home. Christmas lights, warm car, a future unfolding on a quiet street, until he laughed and drove away. But that's just the beginning. From fake proposals to just kidding pregnancy tests, we'll unpack how pranks are being used, not to bond, but to control. We'll explore the psychology of soft manipulation, why emotional hope can be a weapon, and how social media is turning private pain into public entertainment. Some of these stories will make you angry. Some might sound uncomfortably familiar, and some might just change the way you define trust. So if you've ever said, "I didn't think it would hurt that much," or heard, "Don't take it so seriously," this is for you. And hey, if you've lived through a prank that left a scar, not a smile, we want to hear from you. Your story matters, and someone out there needs to know they're not the only one. Tell us your story through the link pinned in the comments. And for every 1,000 views, we'll donate $1 to support people recovering from emotional harm caused by manipulation and betrayal. Hit that like button. Subscribe so you never miss a twist. Drop a comment if you've ever been the punchline to someone else's performance, especially if that joke changed everything. Story 1, he said we bought a house, then laughed and drove off. He said, "I have a surprise for you." It was December. Cold hands, warm car. We just finished driving through the neighborhoods looking at Christmas lights. The kind of night where hope sneaks in, quietly like snow. We pulled up to this beautiful house. Big porch, soft yellow lights, a little sign in the yard that said under contract. He looked at me and smiled. "What do you think?" I said it was perfect. He said, "It's ours." And in that moment, everything felt possible. I saw us there. Finally, space to breathe. A kitchen big enough for Sunday mornings. A door that closed on the rest of the world. I asked, "Are you serious?" He laughed and drove away. No explanation, just a gotcha and silence. And I haven't stopped thinking about that moment since. This is not just a story about a bad prank. It's about what happens when someone uses your dreams as the setup to their joke. It's about the quiet ways people test your love, your boundaries, your patience. And it's about how one harmless prank can feel like emotional whiplash. In this episode, we'll unpack it all. How small jokes can become big betrayals, the psychology of hope as manipulation, when teasing becomes control, and why some funny people don't actually care if you're laughing too. You'll hear real stories, sharp commentary, and questions that might make you rethink what we call a joke, and what we let slide in the name of love. And if you've lived through something like this, even once, we want to hear from you. Everyone has a story. Some leave scars. Some still feel unfinished. It started like one of those Hallmark movie setups, except I wasn't wearing red velvet or accidentally running a bakery. It was just me and Zach, my boyfriend of 4 years, bundled up in the car, sipping gas station hot chocolate, and doing what every broke-button-love couple does in December. Driving around rich neighborhoods to look at Christmas lights we couldn't afford. He was quiet most of the ride. That kind of quiet where you think he either has something really sweet to say, or he's about to tell you he hates your family. But then he said, "I have a surprise for you." That got my attention. Zach S. not a big planner. Last year, his Christmas gift was an Amazon gift card he emailed me while sitting across from me. So, a surprise sounded promising. Big, maybe even meaningful. We kept driving. A few turns later, we pulled up to this gorgeous 2-story house with a big porch swing, little lanterns in the window, and a sign on the front lawn that read under contract. The kind of place that made you think of golden retrievers and birthday parties with actual cake tiers. He turned to me and smiled. "What do you think?" I remember every detail of that moment. My frozen fingers, the fog on the windshield, the way my heart tried to outrun the rest of me. Because for the first time in a long time, I let myself think, maybe this is real. Maybe he bought us a home. Maybe we're not just talking about the future anymore. We're building it. That's what made it feel real. The setup wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It was simple. It was believable. And that's why it worked. Because the cruelest pranks don't come with clown horns. They come wrapped in real moments, in real emotion. They take something tender and twist it, just enough to make you question your own reaction. And that's what we're talking about here. Not just a bad joke, but a moment that exposes how trust can be used as bait. Before I knew what was happening, I was already picturing life inside that house. Which brings us to the driveway, and the sign, and what I said when I saw it, and what he did next. That's when everything shifted. You know that moment when your brain whispers, "This is too good to be true," but your heart, poor thing, decides to believe anyway. That was me, standing in front of that house. Well, technically still sitting in the car, but emotionally, I was already picking out curtains. Zach and I had been living in a one-bedroom apartment for the past 3 years. Our coffee table was also our dinner table, our couch was from a Curb Alert, and our bedroom closet made us negotiate whose jacket got to breathe that season. So yeah, I dreamed of space. Of a kitchen I didn't have to shimmy sideways through. Of a home where we didn't whisper during video calls because the walls were made of hope and drywall. And suddenly, there it was. A house that looked like it belonged to someone who paid for ad-free Spotify. It had that little under-contract sign, the kind that makes you think, wow, we made it. My throat tightened. I didn't cry, not quite, but you know when your vision does that fuzzy thing? Like your eyeballs are buffering? That was me. Because when someone you love shows you something like that, says something like that, your brain lights up. Literally. Dopamine hits. Your body responds like it's happening. You feel it before you even question it. And that's what makes these moments so powerful, so dangerous. You're not just reacting to a house. You're reacting to a future. A feeling of being chosen, of being safe, of finally arriving. Hope has a way of blurring logic. It softens your guard. And if the person holding the hope is also the one holding the joke, you're not protected. You're exposed. It's easy to say, oh, she overreacted. It was just a joke. But when someone builds you up emotionally, shows you the thing you've quietly longed for, and then pulls it away with a grin, that's not harmless. That's emotional whiplash. And here's the thing, the deeper the hope, the harder the fall. He knew exactly what that house would mean to me, and I think on some level that was the point. That brings us to what happened right after, when I asked him the question, when I leaned in. And he laughed, not the nervous kind, not the haha I panicked and said the wrong thing kind. It was a full, shoulders shaking, I got you good kind of laugh, and then he said it. Nope, just kidding. The car pulled away from the curb before I could even blink out of that dream. I sat there, still holding the moment in my hands like it was real, like it hadn't already vanished. Let's be clear, this wasn't a prank. This was a breach. Because when someone invites you into a future, even for a moment, you step in with your whole heart. You don't half dream. You don't kind of imagine where the couch might go. You let yourself feel it. And that's what makes this kind of thing so damaging. It's not just the joke. It's the betrayal of trust that makes you start to question your own instincts, your ability to read the room, your belief that someone who loves you wouldn't dangle hope like a toy. It's the emotional equivalent of pushing someone off a swing right as they're learning to fly. If you think that sounds dramatic, imagine this. Your partner tells you you're pregnant, they say they took the test. You cry, you laugh, you begin to shift. And then they say, just kidding. Still funny, when you make someone believe in a major life change. Something tied to identity, belonging, safety, and you strip it away with a smile. That's not lighthearted. That's cruel. This wasn't just a bad call or a joke that went too far. This was intentional, prepped, executed with full awareness of what it would mean to me. As a woman, you're taught to have a sense of humor, to not take things so seriously. But the truth is, some jokes aren't funny because they're never meant to be. And what makes it worse? This wasn't the first time, but I didn't know that until later. Turns out, this wasn't some one-time brain lapse. It was a pattern. After it happened, I did what a lot of people do when something hurts but doesn't quite make sense. I posted about it. Reddit. relationship advice thread, just trying to figure out if I was being too sensitive or if I had a right to feel violated. And then someone commented. They knew Zach, not vaguely. Not, oh, I think we went to the same high school. They knew him, dated him. And guess what they said? He'd done something eerily similar before, pretended to propose, made his ex think it was the moment, got down on one knee at a family dinner, pulled out a ring box, opened it, empty, laughed, said, "Just kidding. I wanted to see your face." That's not a joke. That's a test. And not the sweet kind of "what if I surprised her with puppies" test. This is the poke the bear, see if it growls, then call it dramatic kind of test. Some people flirt with emotional risk like it's a game. They don't check if the water's warm, they cannonball into it, holding your feelings like a phone they don't mind breaking. This was never about fun. It was about control. You want to know what a real red flag looks like? It's someone who uses pretend futures to measure how much of your real self you'll give them. Because if they can make you cry over something they didn't mean, they know exactly where to hit next time. And this kind of behavior doesn't come out of nowhere. It's part of something deeper, a way of turning hope into a weapon. So let's talk about that. How people use your dreams not just to hurt you, but to hold power over you. Let's talk manipulation, but make it festive. See, when Zach pulled the house stunt, it wasn't random. It wasn't just bad judgment or a weird sense of humor, it was intentional. And it worked because it used the most powerful emotional tool in any relationship: hope. Hope is underrated as a form of control. It doesn't scream, it doesn't threaten, it whispers. It says, "Look how close you are, keep going. Just trust me." And when someone offers hope with no intention of following through, it becomes what psychologists call soft manipulation. Subtle enough to pass as affection, but calculated enough to keep you off balance. It's the same trick behind love bombing: intense affection, grand gestures, sudden promises, followed by emotional withdrawal. The goal isn't connection, it's conditioning. They want to see how far they can pull you in before they pull the rug out. Zach didn't just prank me with a house. He engineered a moment where I let my guard down, felt safe, and then tied my trust to a trap door. It's like offering someone a wrapped gift, letting them hold it, shake it, believe in it, and then telling them it was never real. That's not a laugh. That's emotional sabotage dressed up as a holiday moment. And the worst part, people like Zach often frame it as just checking where we stand. But it's not about where we stand. It's about watching you stumble and calling it feedback. That's what makes this kind of behavior so hard to spot. It's dressed in warmth. It pretends to be romantic. But it's designed to keep you guessing and make sure they're the one holding the pen when the story gets written. And speaking of stories, let's talk about how this kind of behavior plays out on social media. Because Zach isn't the only one turning heartbreak into a spectacle. There's a whole culture built around it. Let's define the line. Because apparently, some people skipped that day in school, assuming it was ever taught. Here's the thing, not all pranks are bad. Some are genuinely sweet, clever, even memorable for the right reasons. Like the guy who gave his girlfriend a scarf for Christmas. She smiles politely, says thank you, then sees a concert ticket fall out of the folds. It's her favorite band. Cue happy tears. Everybody wins. Now compare that to, you just got a house. Oh wait, never mind. See the difference? Good pranks are rooted in joy. They build anticipation, then deliver something better or at least harmless. Bad pranks. They dangle real emotions and rip them away for sport. The test is simple. If the joke hinges on someone feeling loved, safe, or excited, and the punchline is pulling that away, you're not being funny, you're being cruel. A prank should be like a balloon, unexpected, fun, and, if it pops, harmless. Not like a defibrillator to someone's hopes and dreams. Let's be honest, pranks can be powerful storytelling moments, but the moment they humiliate, shame, or emotionally blindside someone, it stops being playful and starts being performative cruelty. You want a real test? Ask yourself this: would the person still laugh if there were no camera? If the answer is no, you're not doing a prank. You're staging a betrayal. And this brings us right to the culture that keeps this behavior alive: the followers, the views, the clout. Because what happens when pain becomes content? Let's talk about TikTok. You ever see those TikToks where someone proposes, gets down on one knee, dramatic music playing, and then yells, "Just kidding"? And the comments are split right down the middle. Half are laughing. The other half are typing, "This is emotional abuse." Welcome to clout culture, where feelings are props and empathy is negotiable. There's this growing trend where the goal isn't connection, it's reaction. More shock, more comments, more shares. And if that means breaking someone's heart on camera, so be it, as long as the algorithm smiles. Think about the fake lottery ticket prank. Someone thinks they just won $500,000. They jump. They cry. They call their mom. And then, surprise, it's fake. Or the fake pregnancy test reveal. Someone believes they're about to become a parent. Then the rug gets pulled, and all for 30 seconds of digital applause. The problem isn't just the cruelty, it's how normalized it's become. Because when enough people reward it with likes, it stops feeling wrong. It starts to look like strategy, and that's where the danger is. Because the line between entertainment and exploitation isn't a thick one anymore. It's thin, blurry, and often crossed without a second thought. Some of y'all are chasing views like empathy's optional. But here's the truth. If your joke needs someone else's pain to land, it's not content, it's cruelty with lighting. And that's why Lena's story hits different, because this wasn't a viral skit. There were no cameras, no hashtags, just one woman, one house, one moment of belief, followed by silence. So what do you do after something like that? What happens when the joke ends, but the hurt does? Let's talk about the fallout and the choice she made. Would you marry someone who pranked you into heartbreak? Because Lena, she walked away. In a quiet Reddit update, weeks after the original post, she said she'd called off the engagement, gave the ring back, told her family, canceled the venue. No scandal, no dramatic exit, just one final act of clarity. And here's what mattered. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't even about the prank, at least not on the surface. It was about trust, about emotional safety, about waking up and realizing, if someone can laugh at your deepest hopes, they're not your future, they're your warning. Because what starts as just a joke can grow into a pattern. And Lena knew, if she had to start her marriage doubting whether her fiancé respected her feelings, she'd spend the rest of it trying to convince him they mattered. She didn't want a partner who played with boundaries like they were breakaway props. She wanted a home where no one had to second-guess if the kindness was real. And honestly, good for her. Engagements don't come with refund policies, but sanity does. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do isn't forgive and move on. It's recognize a red flag and stop moving toward it. And the internet noticed. People rallied. Comments poured in. Let's take a look at what the community had to say. Because sometimes, strangers on Reddit deliver the justice you never thought you'd get. Let's hear from the people. Because while Zach was out there treating emotions like party favors, Reddit was busy handing out truth bombs, and frankly, they didn't miss. Top comment: you don't marry people who enjoy seeing you cry. Straight, simple, bulletproof wisdom. Another favorite: tell him you were joking when you said yes to the proposal. Brutal, elegant, the kind of poetic justice Shakespeare would have high-fived, but the one that really stuck. This man weaponized Zillow. And look, when a community of strangers can so precisely capture your heartbreak and turn it into a meme, you know you're not crazy. You're not overreacting. You're just finally seeing things clearly with the internet's collective flashlight. What Lena experienced wasn't some isolated misunderstanding. It was part of a larger pattern, one so familiar, thousands of people saw themselves in it. Women, men, partners, friends, people who'd once been laughed at when they were most vulnerable. And the thing about online spaces, sometimes they remind you of what your inner circle forgets to say, that you're allowed to have boundaries, that you're not too sensitive. That being kind doesn't mean being a doormat with great communication skills. And yeah, maybe it sounds petty to read through comments for validation, but sometimes that's exactly what you need. To know you're not alone. To know it's okay to walk away. To know that a joke isn't a joke if it makes only one person laugh and the other question their worth. And that brings us to the final chapter. Because Lena's story may have started with a fake house, but it ended with something real, a choice to start over, on her own terms. If the punchline is someone's heartbreak, it's not a joke. It's a warning. This whole story. It started with Christmas lights and a smile. With one woman hoping for a home and realizing she had to build something far more important first, a boundary. Zach's prank wasn't about laughter. It was about control, about testing limits and wrapping manipulation in the gift wrap of humor. But Lena saw through it. She didn't just walk away from a house. She walked towards self-respect. And that's the real message here. Humor doesn't get to be a free pass. Love doesn't mean surrendering your emotional safety. And "it was just a joke" isn't an eraser for harm done. Pranks can be funny. They can even be bonding. But the moment they become tools to belittle, confuse, or control, they lose their punchline and become a red flag in disguise. We all want to believe in the best of people. But believing in someone shouldn't come at the cost of abandoning yourself. So here's to Lena for showing us what it means to laugh again, but not at your own expense. To walk away, even when the porch light is glowing. And to choose truth over illusion, dignity over drama. Have you ever been pranked in a way that left a scar, not a smile? Share your story through the link we've pinned in the comments, anonymously, if you'd like. We'll share a few in our next episode. Don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens when the tables turn. We've got revenge stories coming, and this time, the joke's got a consequence. Story 2, my brother-in-law glued my belly button. I took him to court. I've always believed in two things. 1, you never wake a sleeping baby. 2, you definitely never mess with a sleeping grown man, especially if that man is your brother-in-law. But apparently, Jake, my wife's younger brother, missed the memo. It was a Sunday barbecue. The kind where the sun's too bright, the burgers are a little too burnt, and the beer hits just right. I was full, happy, laid out on a lawn chair in the shade. The next thing I remember is waking up to a sharp, burning sensation in my belly button, and finding out someone, specifically Jake, had filled it with industrial-strength glue, not a prank kit, not Elmer S. Actual adhesive used for fixing furniture. He thought it was hilarious. I thought it was $2,253 in ER bills plus a small surgical procedure. Turns out, glue and old scar tissue don't mix. And that's how we went from burgers and beers to court dates and copays. Over the next hour, we're going to walk through how one prank nearly tore apart a family, how it triggered legal consequences, ethical dilemmas, emotional gaslighting, and one very awkward Thanksgiving. We'll talk about ADHD being used as a moral shield, the fine line between brotherly humor and bodily harm, and whether accepting help from someone's mother means sacrificing your own dignity. Because this isn't just a story about glue. It's a story about boundaries, about when enough really is enough, and how sometimes the real damage isn't what happens to your skin, but what happens to your sense of safety. Have you ever had a moment where someone crossed a line and called it just a joke? There's something sacred about a post-barbecue nap. You've earned it. You grilled the meat, dodged small talk with your neighbor's new boyfriend, and politely pretended your stomach could handle 4 kinds of potato salad. So when I dozed off in that patio chair, sun on my face, half-finished beer still sweating in my hand, it wasn't just sleep. It was peace. Until it was. I woke up maybe 30 minutes later with this weird, tight feeling around my belly button. At first, I thought it was a bug bite, or maybe one of those nap lines that turn into a temporary tattoo. But when I sat up, the pain sharpened. I looked down. My shirt had ridden up. There was something shiny inside my navel, hardened, glossy, and pulling at the skin. Jake, my brother-in-law, 26 years old, a self-described prank enthusiast. He stood a few feet away with a bottle of Gorilla Glue and a look on his face like a kid caught scribbling on the walls, but proud of the art. He laughed, my wife laughed too, for about 2 seconds. I didn't, because let me tell you something about super glue, it doesn't just wear off. And belly buttons, they're not decorative. Mine had a surgical scar from years ago, and within an hour it started swelling. We iced it, tried olive oil, tried lemon juice. Jake even suggested peanut butter because that works for gum and hair. It didn't. 2 hours later, I was in urgent care with a nurse telling me I should have come in sooner, that the glue had pulled at scar tissue, that I might need a minor procedure to prevent further irritation, that this wasn't a joke, it was an injury. And suddenly, the laughter around me sounded very far away. Here's the thing about pranks, they're only funny when everyone gets to laugh. But when the punchline comes with a medical bill, that's not humor. That's harm. This wasn't just a sticky situation. It was the beginning of something much messier, emotionally, financially, and relationally. Because glue doesn't just stick skin. Sometimes it unravels trust. And as you'll see, this prank didn't end with a bandage. It ended in court. Here's what $2,253 buys you in the American healthcare system. A rushed ride to urgent care, an alarmed nurse with eyebrows permanently raised, a shot of lidocaine, and a doctor muttering, "You're kidding me, right?" Nope, not kidding, not even a little. By the time I got to the clinic, the skin around my belly button was red, hot, and pulling tight, like my own body had developed a vendetta against me. Turns out, industrial-strength glue and human skin aren't compatible. And belly buttons? They're a lot more medically significant than we like to admit. Let's break it down. The navel is essentially a scar, the first one we ever get. For some people, especially those with surgical history like me, that area can be fragile. The skin is thinner, the nerve endings more reactive, and the tissue underneath often contains remnants of old stitches, mesh, or scar adhesions. So when someone fills that spot with chemical adhesive and the glue cures, it doesn't just dry, it bonds, deeply, painfully, and removing it means damaging what's underneath. The doctor had to debride the area, meaning he gently scraped away dried glue and inflamed tissue. Not exactly a procedure you want done while still smelling like barbecue sauce. He warned me of possible infection, scarring, and said I might feel nerve pain for weeks. And then he asked the question I was dreading. How did this happen? I told him the truth. My brother-in-law thought it'd be funny. He didn't laugh. This part matters. Because too often, people treat physical pranks like they're harmless fun, like anything short of a broken bone is just overreacting. But here's the thing, your body doesn't know it's a joke, and medical trauma doesn't care about intent. The problem with pranks is that they usually measure success by shock value, not safety. But when you're on a hospital bed with gauze taped to your stomach, the punchline doesn't land the same. This was the moment everything shifted. Not just because of the pain, but because now the damage was documented. And with documentation came decisions, legal ones, financial ones, family ones, and I wasn't the only one who would feel the cost. Pain is one thing, but nothing stings quite like being hurt, then told it didn't happen the way you remember it. When I came home from urgent care, gauze taped to my stomach and a bill in hand, I expected concern, maybe even regret. What I got instead was a shrug. And a sentence I'll never forget. Jake didn't mean to hurt you. You're blowing this way out of proportion. That came from my wife, the woman who'd seen me doubled over in pain, who helped hold a cold compress to my stomach before driving me to the clinic, who now stood between me and her brother, not just physically, but emotionally. And in that moment, I didn't just feel injured. I felt invisible. Let's talk about gaslighting. It's not always dramatic. It doesn't always sound like you're crazy. Sometimes it's much subtler. Sometimes it sounds like, it wasn't that bad. It was just a joke. You're making it into a bigger deal than it is. But that's the thing about gaslighting. It takes your pain and turns it into your fault. Suddenly, you're not the person who was wronged. You're the person who's ruining the vibe. What made it worse was the silence from the rest of the family. His mom didn't call. His dad sent a text that said, "Hope you're feeling better," with a smiley face. No one asked Jake to apologize. No one questioned the prank itself. Because when you grow up in a family where humor means pushing limits, boundaries become optional, and calling them out makes you the problem. That's what loyalty looks like sometimes. Not the good kind, where people protect each other, but the twisted kind, where silence is mistaken for peace and accountability is mistaken for betrayal. And me, I was expected to take it, to let it go, to laugh it off because that's what family does, but I wasn't laughing. And I was done being the punchline. What they didn't realize yet, what even I hadn't realized fully, was that something had cracked open that day. And like most things involving superglue, once it breaks, it doesn't go back the same. When Jake finally called me, it wasn't to apologize. It was to explain. "Look, I just didn't think it through," he said. "That's kind of how my ADHD works. I act first, process later. It's not like I meant to hurt you." And just like that, the prank became a symptom. Let's be clear, ADHD is real. It affects focus, impulse control, emotional regulation. It's not a punchline, and it's definitely not an excuse. But over the past few years, we've entered this odd space where some people use mental health diagnoses like moral coupons, redeemable for an unlimited number of oopsies. There's a difference between explaining behavior and excusing it. Understanding where someone's coming from helps us show empathy, but accountability, that still needs to show up to the party. Imagine this. You run over someone's foot with a shopping cart because you were distracted. That's an accident. Maybe it's even ADHD related. But if you never say sorry, if you just point at your diagnosis like it's a get-out-of-jail-free card, that's not empathy. That's deflection. That's what Jake did. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't offer to help pay for the medical bill. He didn't even acknowledge that pouring glue into someone's belly button while they're unconscious might be worth a bit more than my bad. He used ADHD not as a bridge, but as a shield. The irony? I actually get it. I grew up around neurodivergent family members. I know how real the struggle can be. But I also know that being neurodivergent doesn't cancel out being accountable. In fact, it often makes people more aware of how their actions affect others, because they've been judged unfairly so many times themselves. What hurt wasn't just the glue or the bill or the scar. It was being told that my pain didn't count because his brain works differently. That moment shifted everything. Because now, the question wasn't, can I forgive a prank? It became, can I trust someone who won't take ownership of harm? That's when I started looking into something I never thought I'd consider for a family member: small claims court. People love to say, it was just a joke. But legally, that phrase doesn't mean much once the medical bills show up. Here's what I learned the hard way. In the eyes of the law, a prank doesn't get a hall pass if it causes actual harm. In fact, the line between funny and liable is a lot thinner than most people think. After a few days of icing my abdomen and icing out Jake's texts, I started doing some research. Because if I was stuck paying over $2,200 for an ER visit, someone else should be sharing the tab. That's when I stumbled onto something called small claims court. Now, for anyone who's never been there, here's how it works. You don't need a lawyer. You file a claim, usually online or at the courthouse, stating how you were harmed and how much money you're seeking to recover. The limit varies by state, but most allow claims up to $5,000 or more. Then, you show up in court with your evidence: photos, bills, text messages, even medical notes. The judge listens. The other party defends. A decision is made. Simple, kind of. The key point: intent doesn't erase impact. If someone's actions caused physical injury, financial loss, or emotional distress, they can be held accountable, even if they didn't mean it that way. And it turns out I'm not alone. There was a case in Ohio where two coworkers rigged a chair with plastic wrap, and the victim fell, tearing a ligament. That office prank ended with a $14,000 judgment. In another case, a teenager filled a friend's shampoo bottle with hair remover. The friend had a scalp condition. She sued and won. So yeah, gluing someone's belly button shut after surgery, that's not slapstick. That's a lawsuit. I didn't want revenge. I wanted reimbursement. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted Jake to sit in a room where the punchline wasn't his. Because here's the bottom line: pranks don't live in a consequence-free bubble. If it costs someone pain, time, or money, it might cost you too. And at that point, it wasn't about jokes anymore. It was about justice. There's a fine line between messing around with your buddy and assault. Turns out that line is a lot easier to cross than most people think, especially when you're holding a tube of superglue. Let's start with something innocent. Your friend falls asleep on the couch. You grab a Sharpie and give them a fake mustache. Classic, annoying? Yes, but nobody ends up in the ER, and the ink washes off with soap and maybe a little regret. Now take that same setup, someone asleep, defenseless, and instead of a marker, you apply industrial adhesive to their skin. That's not a joke anymore. That's tampering with someone's body without their consent. Let's call it what it is: physical violation. We live in a culture that praises the bro code, where friends prank each other, haze each other, toughen each other up in the name of bonding. But sometimes, what gets passed off as just messing around is really just a way to ignore boundaries. Because here's the thing: consent doesn't take a nap when you do. And no one signs up to be a science experiment just because they're related to the prankster. Legally speaking, the difference between a joke and a lawsuit usually hinges on 3 questions. Was there intent to harm? Did the action cause physical damage or distress? Would a reasonable person find this prank acceptable? Jake failed all 3. No, he didn't mean to send me to the hospital, but he also didn't stop to think if gluing someone's body shut could be dangerous. Yes, I was physically hurt. I missed 2 days of work. I had follow-up visits. And no, a reasonable person would not call this harmless fun. Here's the uncomfortable truth. People love to hide behind humor because it's disarming. But "I was joking" is not a reset button. It's not a shield, and it definitely doesn't make it okay. At some point, you have to ask, is the joke worth more than the relationship? Because the second someone feels unsafe around you, it's not a friendship, it's damage control. And for me, that moment came in a courtroom, not a backyard. If Jake thought the hospital bill was the end of it, he clearly underestimated one thing: the internet. Specifically, Reddit, where stories like mine don't just get read, they get judged. And let me tell you, the comment section was ruthless in the best possible way. He acted like an ass and got taxed for it. It's not a joke if it comes with a hospital bill. If your humor requires anesthesia to pull off, you're not funny, you're a liability. This isn't family drama. This is Exhibit A. It was oddly healing, because for the first time since it happened, I didn't feel crazy for being upset. I felt validated. The community didn't care that Jake was my brother-in-law. They didn't give him points for being playful or spontaneous or quirky. They saw a grown man violate another adult's body in their sleep, and they called it what it was: wrong. And that's the shift we're seeing more and more in these online spaces. People are done excusing harmful behavior just because it comes with a smile. There's a collective fatigue around "family gets a pass" culture, because too many of us have been told to keep the peace at our own expense. Reddit didn't want peace, they wanted accountability. And they delivered it with upvotes, sharp humor, and some of the most cathartic digital gavel bangs I've ever seen. Turns out the internet can be petty. But sometimes, it's petty for justice. And reading those comments made one thing crystal clear: I wasn't overreacting, I was undersupported. The verdict was in. The people had spoken. And honestly, their sentence was better than the court's. A week after the court date, just when I thought the drama was cooling off, I got a call I didn't expect. It was my mother-in-law, soft voice, measured tone. "Listen," she said, "this has gone far enough. Jake is your brother now. Can't we just put this behind us? I'll cover the medical bill, let's move on." And for a split second, I almost said yes. Because it sounded kind, because I was tired, because conflict in a family can feel like a gas leak: silent, invisible, but deadly if you ignore it long enough. But then the other half of my brain kicked in. Jake didn't offer to pay. Jake didn't apologize. Jake didn't show any sign that he even understood what he'd done. And now here was his mother, not the person who glued me, not the one who laughed while I screamed in pain, offering to buy back the peace. It felt wrong, not because her gesture wasn't generous, but because it was loaded with guilt that didn't belong to her. This wasn't just about money, it was about responsibility. There's a dangerous illusion that forgiveness means forgetting. That covering the cost means clearing the slate, but paying a bill doesn't rewrite the truth. It doesn't teach consequences, it doesn't build trust, it just silences the noise. And I realized, accepting her offer would have meant participating in the silence. It would have turned justice into, let's keep things comfortable. It would have sent the message that as long as someone else steps in with a check, the person who actually caused harm doesn't have to face it. That's not closure, that's cover-up. So I told her gently but clearly, I appreciate the offer, but if Jake's old enough to do it, he's old enough to deal with it. She sighed, said she understood, but I could tell she didn't agree. And that's okay. Sometimes protecting your peace means disappointing people who never had to live through the fallout. Sometimes saying no to a check is saying yes to your own voice. Because true accountability shouldn't come gift-wrapped by someone else. Let's talk about a certain kind of humor, the kind where only one person is laughing. Sociologists have a term for it, one-sided humor. It's when a joke exists purely at someone else's expense. And in this case, that someone was me. We've all seen these pranks before. Pretending a dog ran away just to film someone panicking. Swapping out important documents with fakes before a big appointment. Losing your partner's passport at the airport. Hilarious. Right? No, not if your heart rate spikes. Not if you lose sleep. Not if you're left holding the emotional bag while someone else counts the views. Because here's the deal. If a joke requires fear, panic, or humiliation from someone you love, it's not a joke. It's manipulation, dressed in confetti. It's emotional currency traded for entertainment value. And while it might earn you a few chuckles from strangers online, it bankrupts trust in the relationships that actually matter. What Jake did wasn't new. It just followed a playbook we're finally starting to tear up. Make someone feel powerless, call it funny, and blame them if they don't laugh. That's not comedy. That's emotional trespassing. And the wild part, for a long time, even I thought I was being too sensitive. Because we've been conditioned to believe that lighten up is the cure for everything. But here's what I've learned. You can have a great sense of humor and a strong sense of boundaries. The two are not mutually exclusive. In fact, the best kind of laughter is the kind we share, not the kind we survive. So the next time someone says, "It's just a joke," ask yourself, who's laughing? And who's bleeding under the punchline? Because if it's one-sided, maybe it's not funny after all. Let's be clear about something. Falling asleep at a family barbecue should not end in the ER. Being related to someone doesn't mean they get a free pass to your body. And humor, real humor, shouldn't leave behind hospital bills, stitches, or silence. What happened to me wasn't just a prank gone wrong. It was a breach of trust disguised as a joke. It was one of those moments that changes how you walk into a room. That makes you double-check who's holding the glue gun, literally and emotionally. We've unpacked a lot in this episode. How easy it is for humor to cross the line into harm. How families sometimes protect the wrong people for the sake of peace. How mental health can be misused as an excuse instead of a reason to grow. And how, when jokes become one-sided, they stop being funny and start being wounds. But here's the real takeaway. Boundaries matter, even with people who love us. Especially with people who claim they do. Because respect doesn't get to clock out just because you share a last name or a beer or a backyard. So the next time someone says, "It was just a joke," ask yourself, would I still think it's funny if it happened to me? And if the answer is no, it's okay to say so. Loudly, clearly, without apology, because you deserve to feel safe in your own body, even when you're asleep, even at a barbecue, even when someone else calls it love. What's the worst prank someone pulled on you while you weren't conscious? Story 3, a coworker whispered 5 buried, none found. I called 911. You ever have a night at work that starts off normal, slow, quiet, maybe even a little boring, and then flips into something straight out of a crime podcast? That was my Tuesday. I was the only one on shift at the front desk of a mid-range hotel. It was 2:17 a.m., I remember the time exactly, because I just reheated leftover nachos in the staff microwave and was debating whether to Google how many carbs are in processed cheese. And then the phone rang. The voice on the line was low. Male, familiar maybe, but what he said was anything but funny. 5 buried, none found. And then he hung up. Not exactly your average prank call. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. I checked the security cams. Nothing clear, just a shadow crossing the parking lot. I did what every woman working alone at 2 a.m. has rehearsed but hopes never to use. I called 911. Turns out it wasn't a serial killer. It was someone worse in a way, my coworker, off duty, showing up just to mess with me. What followed was a chain reaction of denial, shame, and the kind of office politics you don't learn about in training. People laughed, I didn't. And for some reason, that made me the problem. This is a story about fear, gender, and what happens when safety is treated like a punchline. We're breaking down how manipulation can hide behind humor, why it was just a joke, isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card, and what it really means to be believed when you speak up. If you've ever had a moment where your instincts screamed something was off, but everyone else told you to lighten up, this story is for you. My name's Casey. I work night shifts at a roadside hotel about 30 minutes outside of town, the kind of place with a vending machine that still takes quarters and a lobby plant that's somehow always dusty. On paper, the job sounds simple. Check in the occasional traveler, restock coffee pods, and answer the rare 2 a.m. phone call from someone asking if we have a pool. We don't. We just have a broken ice machine and a lot of hope. But if you're a woman working alone at night, it's never just that simple. At 2 a.m., silence isn't peaceful, it's loaded. The parking lot looks endless in the dark. The buzz of the ceiling fan feels loud enough to mask footsteps, and every flicker on the security cam makes you squint a little harder and wonder, did I just see something move? That night, I did. A figure passed through the lower left corner of the camera, just outside, near the dumpster. Not a guest. Not scheduled maintenance. Just someone. Moving. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. Just enough to raise every hair on the back of my neck. And here's the thing people don't talk about. When you're on your own, especially as a woman, you learn to read rooms and screens like your life depends on it. You don't get to wait and see. You get to prepare. Mentally, emotionally, sometimes even physically. It's not about fear. It's about readiness. There's this fine line you walk during late shifts between calm professional and amateur crime scene investigator. And I was right on the edge of it, nachos in one hand, mouse over the security feed with the other. That's when the phone rang. We're going to get to that call, the words that changed everything in the next part. But right now, if you've ever worked a late shift and felt that quiet tension in your gut, you already know. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a decision point. Stay calm or trust your gut, and I was about to learn which one mattered more. The call came from inside the building. That's not just a line from a horror movie, it's literally what happened. I checked the front desk phone, internal line, extension 106, storage room, no one was supposed to be in there, and then I heard it. A voice, low and weirdly calm, said, 5 buried. None found, that's it. No hello, no explanation, just that. It wasn't even the words that got me, it was the tone. Like someone reading a bedtime story to a ghost. My whole body snapped to high alert. You know that feeling? When your heart isn't just beating fast, it's beating wrong. Like it's slamming on every emergency button at once. Chest tight, ears buzzing. My hand was already hovering over the 911 line before my brain caught up. And here's what they don't teach you in orientation. Panic is not the opposite of bravery. It's the preparation for it. When your body goes into that state, racing pulse, tunnel vision, your legs ready to run or freeze, it's not weakness. It's design. It's your nervous system saying, hey, we've got 30 seconds to not die. Let's go. I didn't know if it was a joke, a threat, or the start of something worse. But at 2:17 a.m., with half the hotel asleep and zero backup on site, I made a choice I stand by to this day. I called 911. And you know what? I wasn't scared because I was fragile. I was scared because something wasn't right, and being scared was the reason I stayed safe. Because the worst thing someone can do in a moment like that isn't overreact. It's underestimate. The cops showed up within minutes. Flashlights, questions, calm professionalism that made me feel, for a second, like maybe I wasn't overreacting. They checked the grounds, the security footage, no sign of forced entry, no masked figure from a thriller. But then something did show up on the screen. It was Jard, my coworker. No scheduled shift, no call-in, just Jard wandering into the staff-only hallway with a grin and his phone out, like he was filming a prank for a channel that should have been called Welcome to Lawsuitville. He left before the police arrived. Didn't even bother to explain. When they asked if I knew him, I felt my stomach drop. Because yes, I knew Jard. I just didn't know he was the type to sneak into a hotel at 2 a.m. to whisper cryptic serial killer lines over the phone. No heads up. No, hey, it's me. Just fear, manufactured, packaged, and delivered for his entertainment. And here's the thing. If it hadn't been a coworker, if it had been real, I wouldn't be here telling this story. I might not be here at all. That's what people don't get. When you blur the line between joke and threat, you take away someone's sense of control. You don't get to decide how scared someone should feel in the dark, alone, on the night shift. There's a reason surprise and trauma sometimes feel like synonyms. And in that moment, staring at Jard's face on the grainy camera screen, all I could think was, what if he wasn't just being funny? What if this time it was real? You'd think after calling the cops and exposing Jard's midnight creep fest, people would have lined up to say, wow, that was messed up. You okay? But nope. Instead, Jard retold the whole thing in the break room like it was a sketch from some edgy late-night comedy show. Punchline included. He made himself the misunderstood, funny guy, and painted me as the buzzkill with 911 on speed dial. And somehow it stuck. Coworkers stopped making eye contact. I'd walk into the room and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Suddenly, I was Sarah from the front desk. I was the one who can't take a joke. No one said it out loud. They just drifted, skipped the small talk, left me out of lunch plans. That silent rejection hurts worse than shouting, because it's not just what they're saying, it's what they're not saying. No one asked how I was sleeping after that night. This isn't just awkward office politics. This is collective gaslighting. It's what happens when a group decides that your fear makes them uncomfortable, so they rewrite the story until you're the problem. And for a lot of women, this isn't new. Speak up, you're dramatic. Stay silent, you're complicit. Laugh it off, you're cool. React like a human being. Suddenly, you're too much. But fear isn't an overreaction. It's an alarm. And when a whole room decides not to hear it, it doesn't mean it wasn't ringing. If Jard had been the one working the night shift, and he had heard a voice say, 5 buried, none found, we'd be calling him vigilant, proactive, a true professional. But since it was me, a woman, suddenly it was, calm down, you're overthinking it, or my personal favorite, you really called 911 for that. There's a funny thing about fear. People only respect it when it comes from the right person. If a guy gets spooked, it's taken seriously. If a woman does, it's labeled emotional, overreacting, dramatic. This isn't just a workplace problem, it's a cultural script. You see it everywhere. Fire drills no one takes seriously until a man in a badge says evacuate. Or women reporting stalkers only to hear, are you sure it's not just a coincidence? It's a pattern. Men showing caution get praised for foresight. Women showing caution get blamed for making others uncomfortable. But safety isn't a gendered instinct, it's a human one. And treating it like an overreaction just because of who feels it, that's not protecting the peace. That's silencing the alarm. The world teaches women to second-guess their gut, but sometimes your gut is the only thing standing between you and danger. You know, someone said in the break room, maybe he just has a crush. Ah yes, the classic, he scares you because he likes you defense. Because nothing says romantic interest quite like late-night threats whispered over the intercom. Let's unpack this, shall we? There's a cultural habit of romanticizing red flags, turning warning signs into signs he cares. We've all seen it in movies. The guy who shows up uninvited is just persistent. The one who won't take no for an answer? Passionate. And apparently, the coworker who simulates a horror scene at 2 a.m. secretly swooning. No, there's a difference between awkward flirting and psychological intimidation. One makes you blush, the other makes you call 911. Here's the thing, when we excuse creepy behavior as cute but clueless, we train people, especially women, to ignore their instincts. We tell them, maybe you're being too harsh, maybe he meant well. Because real connection doesn't come wrapped in fear. It comes with respect, clarity, and bare minimum, not pretending to be a serial killer on your night off. Let's be honest, everyone loves a good prank when it's actually good. You know, the kind where someone opens a fake gift box and finds concert tickets inside, or when a friend fills your office with balloons and Post-its. Annoying? Sure, but terrifying? Not even close. So why do some people confuse scaring someone senseless with having a sense of humor? The Reddit comment section didn't hold back, and honestly, they might as well have written the official prank constitution. Article 1. No fear-based pranks. Article 2. Never target someone who's alone or in a vulnerable position. Article 3. Own your prank, don't hide behind a mask, a fake name, or worse, the dark. Because here's the truth. Jokes don't require trauma to land. If your funny moment causes someone to lose sleep, call the police, or second-guess their safety at work, it's not a prank, it's a psychological ambush. Humor doesn't have to come at the cost of someone else's peace of mind. This wasn't a harmless gotcha. It was a reminder that some people still treat fear as entertainment. And too often, those people are never the ones left to clean up the emotional mess. So let's be clear, a good prank builds trust, a bad one breaks it. So you're standing in her shoes, you're at work, you did nothing wrong. You followed your instincts, you stayed calm in a terrifying moment. And now, you're the one everyone's whispering about in the break room. What do? File a report with HR, walk away from the job. Call a lawyer and start drafting the paperwork. Here's the thing most people forget. When your workplace makes you feel unsafe, physically or psychologically, it's no longer just a prank. It's a pattern, and patterns need consequences. From a legal standpoint, if someone shows up off the clock on private property to intentionally frighten you, that's not just unprofessional. It might cross into harassment or even trespassing, depending on your state. From a company policy angle, many workplaces have a zero-tolerance rule on behavior that threatens employee well-being. But the question is, will HR actually enforce it or file it under misunderstanding? And then there's the human side. Her side. What does it cost her to stay in a place where her fear is dismissed, her reputation twisted, and her boundaries ridiculed? Here's a moment for audience reflection. If you were her boss, what would you do? Would you treat this like a joke, or like a warning sign that someone needs to grow up or get gone? Because sometimes the real prank is pretending a workplace that doesn't protect you still deserves your loyalty. When you're made to feel small in real life, it's strange and oddly beautiful how the internet can become your loudest advocate. After Lena's story hit Reddit, the responses came fast and fierce. You did the right thing. I'd call 911 again. You're not crazy, you're careful. Being safe is not being dramatic, it's being smart. It wasn't the HR department that validated her. It wasn't her coworkers. It was strangers on the internet, people she'd never met, who saw her fear, named it real, and stood beside her in the comment thread like it was a courtroom. One guest put it best. Online strangers believed her more than her coworkers did. And that tells you something powerful about modern connection. Sometimes, the place that knows you least can see you most clearly. Because empathy doesn't require proximity, it just requires attention. This isn't just about going viral. It's about feeling heard. And when someone's trust gets broken at work, sometimes it takes 3,000 upvotes to remind her she's not alone. Lena didn't overreact. She responded the way any human should when something feels off. She trusted her instincts. And yet, she was made to feel like she was the problem. Like being scared was embarrassing. Like being safe was an inconvenience. But here's the truth. No one should ever have to apologize for feeling afraid, not at work, not at home, not anywhere. We've walked through her night shift like it was a scene from a thriller. We've unpacked the prank that wasn't funny, the coworkers who turned cold, the online strangers who showed more kindness than the break room ever did. And all of it leads to this simple truth. Safety is not optional. It's not a nice to have. It's not a reward for being chill or funny or quiet. It's a right. Because a joke that gambles with someone's sense of safety, that's not humor. That's harm with a laugh track. So if you've ever been in Lena's shoes, or even just near them, we want to hear from you. Have you ever been pranked in a way that made you feel unsafe? Share it with us through the pinned link below. It's 100% anonymous, and we'll feature some stories in the next episode. Story 4, she told me she cheated, while pregnant, as a joke. I cheated on you, with my boss. His world stopped, her next words, just kidding. Some jokes land. This one shattered trust like a dropped ultrasound photo. This is a story about how one prank can change everything. How laughter, when misplaced, can sound more like betrayal. And how a man went from prepping baby bottles to wondering if the baby was even his. But it's not just about him. It's about us, how we treat vulnerability in relationships, how we excuse emotional cruelty as just hormones, and why Reddit exploded with theories that maybe. She wasn't joking at all. In this video, we'll unpack the anatomy of a pregnancy prank, break down the emotional cost of fake confessions, and explore what happens when love becomes a punchline. And yes, we'll read what the internet had to say. Spoiler. It involves DNA tests and a whole lot of run, dude. It started like a scene from a movie no one wants to star in. He came home early from work, arms full of takeout, a tired smile on his face. She was already sitting on the couch, hands folded over her belly, eyes red like she'd been crying for hours. Pregnancy glow? Not today. This was more like pregnancy storm cloud. She asked him to sit. He did. She held his hand, looked him straight in the eyes, and said, "There's something I need to tell you. I cheated on you." He didn't say a word, didn't move, didn't even blink. It was like someone had hit pause on his whole body, except for his heartbeat, which had just relocated somewhere near his throat. And then came the second blow. She added, almost in a whisper, "It was with my boss. Now let's pause here. If you've ever been in a relationship, you know this moment. That split second when your brain is still buffering, trying to decide whether to cry, scream, or check if you heard it right. It's a cocktail of disbelief, panic, and the worst-case scenario doing jumping jacks in your head. And for him, it was even more brutal, because they were expecting, because trust had to be a given, because the last thing you should have to question during a pregnancy is whether the baby's first word will be DNA. This moment, this confession, was the crack that split the foundation, except he didn't know yet that the whole thing was about to collapse in the most absurd way possible. Because what she said next didn't bring relief. It didn't explain anything. It made everything worse. We'll get to that in just a moment. But here's the quiet lesson hiding inside this moment. Sometimes, the scariest thing isn't what someone says. It's realizing they rehearsed it. Because no one delivers a lie that cleanly without a little practice. Now, let's talk about what she said after. And why it turned a moment of heartbreak into something a whole lot messier. Before he could even breathe, before a single thought could form in his frozen, spinning head. She smiled, then giggled, then said, "I'm kidding, oh my God, your face." That was it, that was the punchline. He just sat there, still holding her hand, still feeling like he'd been pushed off an emotional cliff and hadn't hit the bottom yet. And she was laughing, like she'd just nailed the best prank of the year. Like this was something they'd tell their kids someday and both laugh about. Spoiler, they would not. Here's the thing, some jokes land, some don't. And some punch you so hard in the gut, you don't even realize you're bleeding until much later. This wasn't funny. Not because he did get it, but because there's a difference between surprise and betrayal. And she confused the two like they were interchangeable. Humor, real humor, requires one key ingredient, shared reality. If only one person is laughing, it's not a joke. It's a disconnect. And in this case, it wasn't just a gap, it was a canyon. She played with his worst fear. Not a silly little gotcha, but the one thing that could break his heart in half. Imagine telling someone in full tears, "I crashed your car," or "I lost our savings," then adding a "just kidding" after watching them crumble. It's not clever, it's not edgy, it's emotional whiplash disguised as entertainment. And here's the irony, he didn't even react. Not with anger, not with yelling, he just blinked. Because the body doesn't know how to respond when the brain is still trying to figure out if the world just broke, or if someone's idea of a joke is trauma. Some people say, "You're too sensitive." But maybe the real issue is this. We've normalized a kind of humor that feeds off panic. We've called cruelty a sense of humor and expected people to laugh with broken ribs. He didn't laugh. And that, apparently, made him the buzzkill. Let's talk about why people started defending her, and why pregnancy hormones became the go-to excuse for emotionally reckless behavior. When the story hit Reddit, a wave of comments came flooding in. And among the laughter, gasps, and "dude, run," came a quieter group, the defenders. "She's pregnant," they said. "Hormones do wild things. You just don't understand what it's like to carry a human inside you." And to be fair, hormones are no joke. Pregnancy can turn the most patient person into someone who cries at cereal commercials and argues with chairs. Mood swings, cravings, foggy memory. It's real. It's biology doing somersaults. But here's the thing, hormones affect emotions. They don't create manipulation out of thin air. There's a huge difference between craving pickles and ice cream, and staging a fake affair to watch your partner emotionally collapse. Blaming hormones for behavior like this is like blaming a microwave for burning down the kitchen. When someone clearly threw in a fork, it's not just inaccurate, it's dangerous. Because when we start using biology as a shield, we stop holding people accountable for how they treat others. And that's not compassion, that's enabling. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment outburst. It was a rehearsed line, complete with stage tears and dramatic pause. Hormones might explain why she cried during Finding Nemo. They don't explain weaponizing trust for a laugh. There's a deeper harm here, too. Because when real mental health struggles are casually invoked to justify emotional games, we make it harder for people who are genuinely struggling to be taken seriously. Empathy doesn't mean excusing harm. It means understanding the context without erasing responsibility. So, was she hormonal? Maybe. Was it still wrong? Absolutely. And this leads us to the next part. Because what if the joke wasn't really a joke at all? What if the most chilling thing was how believable it felt? Once the laughter, or lack of it, died down, the internet did what it does best: turn confusion into conspiracy. Reddit lit up like a crime board in a detective show. Comment after comment started to sound less like reactions and more like investigations. If it was just a joke, why did she cry like that? She looked way too convincing. Like, Oscar-worthy convincing. People don't fake a confession that well unless they've thought about it before. And just like that, the room shifted. What started as a bad prank was now a full-blown psychological thriller. Some even suggested it wasn't a joke at all, that it was a real confession, disguised as humor, just to see how much damage it would do, a loyalty test, a twisted experiment. A what if I told you the truth but wrapped it in a smile? It's not as far-fetched as it sounds, because let's be honest, people do this. They drop uncomfortable truths into jokes, then hide behind a nervous laugh if it doesn't land well. It's the emotional version of "I'm just kidding." Unless you're cool with it. This theory gained traction because it tapped into something universal. When trust is shaken, even silence feels suspicious. And when someone pretends to betray you, believably, you start to wonder if the performance came from memory. It's like watching a magician and realizing they weren't using sleight of hand. They just actually made the coin disappear. The deeper issue wasn't whether she cheated. It was that the joke made cheating feel possible. And once that seed is planted, it doesn't go away easily. Not with reassurance. Not with time. Not even with a paternity test. Because even if it was just a joke, the real lie might be that it ever was one. Let's talk about what that kind of joke really costs. Not in laughs, but in trust. There's a category of jokes that lives in what we call the emotional no-fly zone. Things you just don't touch, not because you're uptight, but because some lines aren't meant to be crossed, even with a wink. And this one, confessing fake infidelity while pregnant. Yeah, that's on the no-fly list, right next to, I'm pregnant, but it's not yours. And, I'm leaving you for your best friend. Some people call these dark humor. But dark humor only works when there's mutual safety, when the room knows it's a bit, when trust is strong enough to carry the joke and no one's heart is on the line. This wasn't that. This was playing emotional Jenga with a man who thought he was building a family. And when the tower fell, all she said was, "Relax, I was kidding." But here's the thing about trust. It doesn't have a reset button. You can't just laugh your way out of breaking it. You can't undo the thought that maybe, just maybe, you meant it. It moves in, sets up camp, and rewatches the moment on loop. The tears, the tone, the precision of the delivery. Jokes don't get that real by accident. And let's not pretend men don't internalize this. A lot of guys won't say anything. They'll nod, they'll smile, they'll say it's fine. But inside, something shifts. Not just toward her, but toward women, toward fatherhood, toward their own instincts. All because someone decided to play roulette with trust and call it humor. There's a cost to that, even if it never shows up on a bill. And it's paid in doubt, distance, and quiet resentment, because funny isn't free. And just kidding doesn't come with a refund. So what happens when jokes like this make people start questioning everything? Let's look at what that did to him, and how it planted a seed of insecurity that grew faster than the baby. After the joke, he said nothing, but silence doesn't mean it's over. Sometimes, silence is just the beginning of the spiral. Because once someone pretends to hurt you so convincingly, you start replaying things you didn't question before. She once said, "I only text him about work, he's just a colleague." He believed her. She came home late a few times, blamed traffic. And he believed that too. Because that's what trust does, it gives you the benefit of the doubt. But now he wasn't so sure. Because when someone takes your worst fear, dresses it up like a joke, and then tells you to lighten up, you start wondering what else they've made look harmless. He didn't accuse her. He didn't snoop through her phone. But his brain started writing its own late-night theories. And that's how insecurity works. It doesn't need proof, just enough space to grow. It's not just second-guessing her. It's second-guessing himself. His ability to read people, to know what's real and what's performance. And the cruelest part, when he did voice concern, gently, tentatively, she called him paranoid, oversensitive, said he was overreacting. That's not just deflection. That's reverse gaslighting, where the person who got hurt ends up apologizing for not laughing hard enough at the thing that cut too deep. In a healthy relationship, trust is a team sport. You protect it together. You don't make it a punchline. But here, he was left to deal with the aftershocks alone, wondering if he was crazy for needing reassurance, or just human for feeling unsteady on broken emotional ground. And here's the quiet tragedy. He wasn't mad, he was unsure. And uncertainty, over time, can erode more love than anger ever could. So what do we do with that? How do we even begin to define boundaries for emotional safety? It starts with a simple idea. Consent doesn't end in the bedroom. Let's talk about what it means to ask for emotional consent, and why that could be the thing we've all been missing. We talk a lot about consent these days, in relationships, in intimacy, in boundaries. And rightfully so, consent is the foundation of trust. But here's a concept we don't hear enough: emotional consent. It's the idea that your feelings, your vulnerabilities, your fears, your memories aren't fair game for someone else's entertainment, that your trust isn't a playground for surprise experiments. Think about it. In physical intimacy, we understand no means no. Consent has to be clear, enthusiastic, ongoing. But what about when someone drops a fake confession into your lap? Just to see how you react? What about using your worst fears as material for a prank? That's not teasing. That's trespassing. Emotional consent means this. You don't get to pull someone's heartstrings just to see if they snap. You don't get to trigger tears just because you plan to follow it with a laugh. You don't get to cry wolf with trust and expect hugs when the wolf turns out to be fake. It's not about being humorless. It's about being human, because real connection, real love isn't built on surprise, I was lying. It's built on safety, predictability, and the quiet agreement that I will not hurt you for fun. And in a time when emotional labor is finally being recognized, when we're learning to name things like gaslighting and trauma bonding, maybe it's time we added emotional consent to the vocabulary, too. Because no one deserves to be used as a lab rat for someone else's lesson in how far is too far, especially not in a moment as tender, as life-altering, as building a family together. Which brings us to the question no one wants to ask, but Reddit definitely did. What happens if this wasn't the first time she twisted truth into a test? And more importantly, what happens if the baby grows up thinking this is what love looks like? They say babies absorb everything. Voices, music, tension in the room. Some researchers even believe that babies in the womb can recognize emotional patterns: joy, fear, calm, chaos. So what happens when a child's earliest emotional blueprint is a punchline? Imagine growing up in a household where just kidding is the go-to exit from any uncomfortable truth, where jokes aren't lighthearted, they're sharp-edged, where gaslighting comes wrapped in humor, and vulnerability is a game show with no prizes. It's easy to say, the baby won't remember. But the thing is, babies don't need memory to inherit emotional weather. They grow in it. They calibrate their safety by it. And what does it teach a child when their very existence was once used as the setup to a fake affair? Even if they never hear the story firsthand, they'll feel the undertones, the distance in their parents' eyes, the mistrust that lingers long after the joke faded. Because emotional patterns don't start when a child starts speaking. They start when a child starts absorbing. And if those patterns are soaked in manipulation, deflection, and shame, well, it doesn't take much for that to become their default. A legacy no one intended, but one that sticks longer than any DNA. This isn't about one prank. It's about the culture we normalize inside families, about the messages we embed between the lines, and how easily humor, misused, becomes a generational habit. Because when trust is treated as disposable, children don't learn to laugh, they learn to flinch. Which brings us to the public courtroom that never misses a case, Reddit. Let's hear what the internet had to say, and why one of the top comments wasn't "talk it out," but "get a DNA test." Yesterday, once the story hit Reddit, the comment section turned into a courtroom. And the verdict? Let's just say sympathy wasn't trending. If she can fake tears, she can fake anything. Get a DNA test before you get therapy. Women like this make men terrified to become fathers. Thousands of upvotes, dozens of personal stories, and one overwhelming theme: trust once cracked doesn't heal with an apology. It hardens, it distorts. Some commenters weren't just reacting to this story. They were reacting to their own. The girlfriend who cried wolf too many times, the ex who joked about cheating until the joke became real, the friend who never recovered from a lie told during pregnancy. That's the thing about public stories, they're never just one person's story, they're a mirror. And sometimes, people do like what it reflects. A few brave voices did try to offer nuance. Maybe she was scared, maybe she didn't know the damage she was doing. But those voices were drowned out by an ocean of hurt, sarcasm, and, "Bro, protect yourself, start with a test." Because for many, this wasn't about whether she cheated. It was about whether she could have. And once that door opens, it's almost impossible to close. There's a harsh but honest lesson here. You can apologize for the joke. You can explain it. But you can't unring the alarm bell it set off in someone's chest. Trust, real trust, is built on consistency. It dies in confusion, and no amount of "just kidding" can silence the question, what if she meant it? Which leads us to the final piece of this story. Not about blame, not about proof, but about what happens to love when it's built on land that keeps shifting. And why some kinds of damage don't show up until it's far too late. Love isn't a dare. Trust isn't a game. And no one should have to brace for emotional impact just to stay in a relationship. What started as a fake confession unraveled into something deeper. A breach of emotional consent, a spiral of doubt, a legacy of silence passed down to the next generation. We saw how one moment of humor turned into real pain, How a man began questioning not just his partner, but his own instincts. How strangers online offered more caution than comfort. And how laughter, when misused, can echo like betrayal. Because once you teach someone that their feelings are fair game, you don't just lose their trust, you lose the version of them that ever felt safe with you. Emotional safety isn't a luxury, it's not extra. It's not optional, it's the foundation. And if we can agree that bodies deserve boundaries, so do hearts, so does trust. So does the quiet kind of intimacy that says, you can fall apart with me, and I won't use it against you. So if there's one thing to take from this story, it's this. Don't turn someone's tenderness into a test. Don't borrow their fears for a joke. And don't ever assume forgiveness is automatic just because you laughed. Because love built on fear isn't love, it's survival. And we all deserve better than that. What would you do if someone joked about betraying you while holding your heart in their hands? Everyone carries a story that shaped how they love, how they trust, or how they healed. If you've been through something that made you question everything, share it anonymously through the pinned link in the comments. We'll feature a few in our next video, because your story might be the one someone else needs to feel less alone. And if you thought this story was wild, wait until you hear what happened to the woman who faked a breakup just to see if her boyfriend would cry. See you in the next one. Story 5, she glued my laptop shut because I beat her at Mario Kart. He thought it was just another friendly game night. A little Mario Kart, some popcorn, harmless trash talk. They always played. She always lost. And every time she'd pout and say, one day I'll get you back. He didn't think she meant it literally, with industrial strength glue on a $2,000 MacBook. The next morning, he tried to open his laptop. The hinge wouldn't budge. The screen was stuck shut like someone had welded it closed. He checked the table. There, in the trash, was the smoking gun, an empty tube of Gorilla Glue. He thought maybe it was an accident, until he found the TikTok. She filmed the whole thing, captioned it, "Love means never letting him win again." What followed was chaos. Reddit blew up. People called it abuse disguised as comedy. Others defended her. It's just a joke, lighten up. But when is a prank just a prank? When does funny start looking like control? Would this still be cute if the roles were reversed? If a boyfriend glued his girlfriend's laptop shut, would we be laughing? This story goes beyond one broken laptop. It's about power, boundaries, and how gender shapes what we're allowed to laugh at. It's about what happens when someone crosses the line, and everyone else argues about whether there was a line in the first place. In this video, we'll unpack the real cost of a funny moment. We'll talk about gender bias in pranks, emotional consent, digital sabotage, and how small acts of destruction get mistaken for signs of love. And we'll hear what the internet had to say, from break up with her to get therapy and a new hard drive. Because sometimes, the most dangerous punchlines are the ones wrapped in pink and posted with a filter. They were that couple, the kind who had matching coffee mugs, shared playlists, and every night after dinner, a Mario Kart showdown. It was their ritual. No matter how long the day was, they'd boot up the Switch, pick their characters. He was always Yoshi. She insisted on Princess Peach, and race like it meant something. It didn't until it did. She lost. A lot. Not by much, but just enough for her to dramatically throw the controller down, flop onto the couch, and declare, "You're so lucky I love you, or I'd destroy you." He'd laugh, offer her a rematch. She'd roll her eyes, "You'll pay for this." It was all part of the rhythm, teasing, banter, mock fury, and honestly, he thought it was cute. The way she'd fake pout, call for revenge, then cuddle up under the same blanket 10 minutes later. It felt harmless. It felt safe. Until one day it was, because jokes, even sweet ones, are like seeds. Say them enough and they start to grow roots. She always joked she'd get even. He never expected she'd use glue. That's the thing about playful competition. It builds connection until someone starts keeping score with something sharper than laughter. Let's talk about the morning he realized this wasn't a game anymore. Not when his laptop refused to open. Not when his livelihood was suddenly glued shut. He had no reason to think anything was wrong. It was a regular morning. Coffee in hand. A little sleepy, but ready to start his day. He sat down, reached for his MacBook, and opened the lid. Or tried to. Nothing moved. The hinge resisted like it had rusted overnight. He tugged a little harder. The screen let out a strange creak, like plastic under stress, then refused to budge. His first thought, maybe it's jammed. Maybe it got knocked off the table. He ran through every scenario except the right one, until he noticed something in the trash can. A small, orange and black tube, empty, sticky around the edges. Gorilla Glue. Suddenly, his brain did a rewind. Last night's Mario Kart, her smirk, the way she said, "You'll regret that victory." At first, he laughed, because it couldn't be real. Who actually does that? But the laughter faded as panic crept in. This wasn't just a prank. This was his work machine, his projects, his contracts, his entire freelance business. He booked an emergency visit to the Apple Genius Bar, where a very kind technician tried not to look horrified, as they pried, open what used to be a fully functioning $2,000 machine. It took $1,700, $3 hours of delicate repair, and one technician whispering, "Man, who'd you make angry?" to confirm what he already knew. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a message. The question was, what happened? It was, why did she do it? And then, because life has a sense of humor, he opened TikTok and found the answer. He didn't even have time to confront her, because TikTok beat him to it. While he was still panicking at the Apple Store, she had already uploaded the video. It was edited, set to music, and captioned in bold pastel text, "Love equals glue nail polish." The video showed her tiptoeing into the living room, opening the glue, smearing it slowly, deliberately along the laptop hinge, laughing to herself like it was the sweetest secret in the world. Cue the aesthetic transitions, jump cuts, and a wink to the camera. It was more than a prank. It was content. The comments came fast and furious. Half the audience was obsessed. Iconic behavior. She's a whole vibe. Girlfriend of the year. The other half called for legal action. This isn't a joke, it's vandalism. Someone get that man a new girlfriend and a new MacBook. And somewhere in the middle of that digital warzone stood one very real guy, watching the internet debate whether he was overreacting to having his livelihood destroyed for likes. Because this wasn't an impulsive joke. It wasn't heat of the moment. This was planned, filmed, captioned, and published. And that changes everything. There's a big difference between an off-the-cuff prank and a fully storyboarded act of sabotage. She didn't just glue his laptop, she storyboarded it. She picked a trending audio, she made it go viral, and that's where it gets uncomfortable. Because once destruction becomes entertainment, where do we draw the line? Let's explore what happens when the roles are reversed. Would this still be called love? If he had glued her laptop shut, let's flip the script. Imagine the exact same story. But it's the boyfriend who glues his girlfriend's laptop shut because she beat him at a video game. He records himself doing it, posts it with the caption, "Guess I couldn't handle losing to a girl. Love you though nail polish." How would that land? There wouldn't be a comment section full of king behavior or husband material. There would be rage, rightfully so, because in that version of the story, the conversation shifts from playful couple to controlling partner. From quirky prank to red flag, and Reddit saw it coming from a mile away. One top comment read, "If a man did this, he'd be canceled before breakfast." And honestly, they're not wrong. The destruction would be seen as possessive, violent, potentially abusive. But somehow, when the one holding the glue is a woman, we let it slide. We call it cute. Unhinged, but in a quirky way. That's the double standard. Because gender doesn't change the facts. A $2,000 machine was ruined. Vital files were lost, boundaries were crossed, and it wasn't funny no matter who did it. There's a pattern here, where certain behaviors get a free pass, not because they're harmless, but because they're unexpected from women. We're more likely to label them emotional, dramatic, passionate, as if love justifies sabotage, if it comes with a side of eyeliner and a TikTok filter. But destruction is destruction, no matter how well lit the video is. Let's talk about what that destruction really cost. Not just in money, but in broken trust, lost work, and the silence that follows a laugh that wasn't shared. She said it with a laugh. It's just a joke. And maybe it was. For her, But here's the reality. That joke cost $1,700 in repairs. It cost hours at the Apple Store. It cost his entire freelance project folder, which hadn't been backed up, because, ironically, he'd planned to do it that morning. One missed deadline, one angry client, one email with the subject line, "We'll be going in a different direction." And you know what no one ever includes in the prank recaps? The quiet part. The night after, when he sat on the floor, holding a dead laptop, and trying to remember which files were gone forever. Because when the punchline ends, someone still has to sweep up the pieces. Pranks have a price tag. Some are cheap, like swapping sugar for salt. Some are annoying, like hiding the remote. But when your joke costs someone money, peace of mind, or professional reputation, that's not humor. That's harm with a laugh track. Let's run the math. Imagine if someone hid your passport the night before an international flight, cut your shoelaces right before a job interview, changed your Wi-Fi password mid-Zoom presentation. Funny? Maybe. But only to the person who wasn't on the receiving end. That's the problem with these harmless jokes. They often rely on one person watching the other squirm, then deciding if the pain was worth it. Humor isn't a free pass. It doesn't erase broken screens, lost contracts, or the sinking feeling in your stomach when you realize someone you love thought this was okay. So let's stop pretending every smile in a video means the person behind the camera is smiling too. Let's talk about what really happens when pranks stop being funny and start being a form of power. Here's a question we don't ask enough in any prank: who's laughing and who's absorbing the fallout? Because not all jokes are created equal, and not all pranks are shared equally. His laptop, his livelihood, the nerve center of his entire life. And that choice wasn't random, it was precise. Calculated, not out of cruelty maybe, but definitely out of control. See, when someone picks the most important thing you own as the target of their joke, it stops being about fun, it starts being about leverage. And in the world of playful pranks, this happens more than we think. Someone throws a pie in your face, knowing full well you hate being touched. Someone hides your pet just to see your reaction. Someone deletes your phone background or cancels your ride as a joke. These aren't just mischievous. They're about watching someone else flinch and deciding that the flinch is funny. It's power, soft, sneaky power, wrapped in glitter and laughter. And when the person doing it gets to choose the timing, the target, the punchline, while the other person is left holding confusion and consequence, you have an imbalance, not just of humor, but of emotional consent. Because the best pranks, they punch up, never down. They include the other person in the joke, not make them the joke. They build connection, not fracture it. This wasn't about revenge for a video game. It was about testing how far she could go, and still get to say, "But I love you." Let's talk about what gets broken when control dresses up like comedy. And why, in a digital world, sometimes it's not just the hardware that gets damaged. It's the person holding it. This story was never just about a laptop. Sure, the glue ruined the hinge. Sure, the screen cracked. Sure, the files were gone, but what it really broke was something far harder to replace: trust. In a world where so much of who we are, our ideas, our work, our memories, live inside glowing screens and blinking cursors, your device isn't just a tool, it's an extension of yourself. Photos from childhood, voice memos you never shared, projects that took months to build, conversations, contracts, creative sparks, all of it lives there. So when someone tampers with that space, they're not just touching your tech, they're trespassing into your mind, your identity, your sense of control. She didn't just glue plastic, she glued over autonomy, and that's what he couldn't shake. Not the money, not even the missed deadline. It was the realization that the one person who should have protected his space treated it like a prop for content. His laptop used to feel like his zone of agency. Now it felt like a liability. Because digital damage doesn't always leave smoke. It leaves silence. It leaves distance. It leaves the feeling that you can't even open your tools without asking, "Am I safe here?" Trust, once violated in the digital world, doesn't just reboot. There's no folder called emotional safety you can drag to the cloud. When she laughed at the prank, he laughed less. And when he replaced the laptop, he didn't replace the feeling. let's look at how others responded. Not just to the prank, but to the idea that this kind of harm could be cute. Spoiler, Reddit wasn't having it. Once the video hit the algorithm, it was everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram Reels. Each platform added its own wildfire. But Reddit turned it into a trial, and the verdict wasn't kind. Break up. That's vandalism, not love. She filmed a crime and smiled through it. Imagine thinking this is affection. Thousands of upvotes, dozens of personal stories, and a common theme. This wasn't a joke gone too far. This was a red flag waving itself, but not everyone agreed. Some came to her defense. Relax, it's just a laptop. He's being dramatic. She clearly meant no harm. My boyfriend pranks me all the time. This is normal. And that's where the problem gets slippery. Because when harm is dressed in pastels and posted with a filter, some people can't see it for what it is. They measure the damage by the reaction, not the action, and because he didn't scream, didn't rage, didn't cry on camera, they decided it must not have hurt. That's the danger of public judgment. When the victim stays calm, we question if they're really a victim. When they speak up, we say they're too sensitive. When they walk away, we call it an overreaction. The community becomes the jury. But the rules change, depending on who's on trial. What Reddit got right was naming what others tried to laugh off. That sabotage, no matter how charmingly edited, is still sabotage. That trust, no matter how playfully violated, is still broken. And that when someone turns your personal boundary into their public content, you have every right to call it what it is. Let's talk about what's underneath these jokes. The red flags dressed as romance, the control hiding inside comedy, and why this kind of behavior isn't just immature. It's a warning. There's a certain kind of red flag that doesn't look like one. It comes wrapped in soft tones, tied with a playful wink, and captioned with emojis. She just gets jealous because she cares. She logs into my accounts because she wants to protect me. She destroyed my stuff, but like in a passionate way. And suddenly, the word crazy becomes interchangeable with cute. As long as she's the one doing it, that's the trap. We've built a culture where possessiveness gets confused with affection, where sabotage is reframed as spontaneity, where control, when painted in pink, is called love. But what do you call it? When someone deliberately breaks your trust and gets applauded for being bold, what do you call it? When emotional boundaries are crossed, then brushed off as just a joke? There's a term for this: romanticized emotional violence. And it's not just a women's issue. It's not a men's issue. It's a relationship issue. Because emotional manipulation doesn't come with a gender. And red flags don't magically turn white just because someone smiles while waving them. We excuse too much when the behavior is unexpected. We minimize damage when it looks pretty. We forgive harm when it posts well on TikTok. But the truth is this: whether you're wearing sneakers or stilettos, if you're crossing someone's boundaries for your own entertainment, it's not passion, it's not love, it's performance. Love shouldn't require an audience, and no one deserves to be humiliated just because the other person looks good doing it. Let's bring this home. Because when humor causes harm, and red flags are hiding in glitter, what's left isn't just damage, it's disillusionment. And the question becomes, what's the cost of a laugh that someone else had to bleed for? Some jokes aren't harmless. Some laughs come with a receipt. And sometimes, what we call playful is just pain in a costume. This started with a race in Mario Kart, the kind of everyday moment couples build their rhythm around. But somewhere between teasing and TikTok, it became something else entirely. A prank that wasn't spontaneous, a laptop that wasn't just hardware, a boundary that wasn't just crossed, it was filmed, captioned, and posted for views. We watched a man lose not just a device, but a piece of trust, a sense of control, and the quiet safety we all deserve in our own digital space. And when he stayed calm, people questioned if it was really that bad. When he didn't yell, they assumed it didn't hurt. But the truth is, damage doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just disconnects. And when love becomes a stage, and humiliation becomes content, we're not just laughing, we're complicit. Here's what we know now: not all red flags are loud, not all harm is physical, and not all jokes are worth clapping for, because gender doesn't excuse disrespect. A cute face doesn't cancel out intent. And being quirky isn't a hall pass for destruction. So the next time someone says, "It was just a joke," ask, was it funny? Or was it simply allowed? Because we didn't want to look too serious. Because here's the mic drop. If it costs someone their work, their trust, or their peace of mind, it's not funny, it's just dressed up damage. Have you ever lost something important to a joke? Your job, your voice, your sense of safety? You're not alone. So, what is a prank, really? Is it still a joke if no one's laughing but the person who caused the hurt? Is it still harmless if it leaves someone questioning their worth, their memory, their entire relationship? Across 5 stories, we've seen how laughter can disguise manipulation, how just kidding can be used like a scalpel, and how easy it is for pain to go viral while healing stays private. But we've also seen something else. We've seen strength, people drawing boundaries, walking away, reclaiming their story, not with revenge, but with clarity. Because the real punchline isn't in the joke, it's in what you do next. So here's what we want you to remember. A joke should never make someone feel unsafe. A prank should never become a pattern. And trust, that's not something you get to borrow for a laugh. If any part of these stories echoed something you've lived through, tell us. You don't need to be loud. You just need to be real. Share your story anonymously through the pinned comment. We'll feature powerful stories in future episodes. And yes, for every 1,000 views, we're putting $1 toward healing. Because pain shouldn't be profitable, but it can be transformed. Like, share, subscribe, tell a friend, start a conversation. And remember, the next story we tell might just be yours.